Any organization that started at any point in time really started it because they thought they could make a positive impact in the world. And I think a lot of times leaders and managers miss the opportunities to connect their employees back to that. How do we invest in our people? How do we care for them? How do we develop them? And then how does that flow out into how the culture gets shaped within Sweetwater? And
the way you talk about your coworkers, you have 2,500 employees. You've never once said the employees there. People are not individual units of talent. They are it's the human and human resources.
What is one surprising fact that most people may not know about Sweetwater?
When we first opened the room up, at one point he flew the helicopter over the building while we were recording.
You're listening to the NEI Pioneer Podcast, where we showcase and share the authentic stories of Northeast Indiana. If you're from this region, if you're into music, or you've listened to any of our episodes, then the name Sweetwater will be familiar to you. Sweetwater is located in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and it is the largest online retailer of musical instruments and pro audio equipment in the United States. They are a sponsor of this podcast, and actually most of the gear that's in this studio came from them. Sweetwater has 2,500 employees and are best known for their unmatched customer relations and employee satisfaction. With a company of that scale and that reputation, you have to ask how. So today we sat down with Jeff Ostermann, who is the Chief People and Culture Officer at Sweetwater. Jeff shares insights into the intentionally designed culture within this well-known business. So take a peek behind the curtain of Sweetwater with us in this episode.
Hello and welcome back to the NEI Pioneer Podcast. I'm Jonathan Sackett, head of MarCom at NEI. I'll be your host along with
Ryan Twiss, Vice President of Regional Initiatives here at NEI.
And today we have Jeff Ostermann joining us from Sweetwater. And I have to tell you, Jeff, first of all, we all know you and everybody knows Sweetwater. And if you don't know Sweetwater, you're either not a fan of music or you've been under a rock for the past few years. So Jeff, your title, I just have to read it because this is one of the longer titles that we've had on here. Senior Vice President and Chief People and Culture Officer. Did I get that right?
You got it right. Spot on.
Okay. So, Jeff, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here with you guys.
It is so good to have you here. And we've got the Superman socks, and I'm sure that was in dedication to me somehow. So I'll take...
Absolutely. I was thinking of you way before I got here.
See, everybody, that's what a lie sounds like. Okay, so let's get into it. So, Jeff, with your position at Sweetwater, and you've been there for 12 years? Is that
12
right?
years, that's right.
12 years. And I was reading your background, very impressive. With your role, could you talk a little bit about what it's like day to day, what you do, what that title means?
Sure. So let me give you a little bit of context and background as to how we got here and how I got to that position. So my background was doing a lot of different types of things, working with founders, owners, doing business development, operations. But what I found over the course of my career is a lot of the work that I ended up doing was with leadership development, helping teams scale and grow as a necessary input to their success and driving the business. So when I first came to Sweetwater 12 years ago, I was working with our founder, Chuck Surack, on a lot of his other business interests, not just the core music company. And after a number of years of doing that, we said, hey, we're growing like crazy. And we so much believe in the power of people, the power of human beings, central to the founding of our organization, which we can talk about. How do we just keep that true for years and years and years to come? So why don't we plug a bunch of energy and direction and leadership back into this idea of people and culture and human beings and caring for them well? And so we said, let's create a new position called Chief People Officer. We later added Chief People and Culture Officer to it. And with responsibility for human resources, responsibility for a lot of what happens on our campus, which we believe is a reflection of the culture, and really just to put some focus and strategy around how do we go about doing that. Doing a lot of day-to-day functional HR things, so I'm ultimately responsible for recruiting and hiring and retention and compensation and benefits programs. All of those are inputs into the people experience, but also more broadly talking about how do we invest in our people, how do we care for them, how do we develop them, and then how does that flow out into how the culture gets shaped within Sweetwater, and then ultimately how does that show up in how we care for our customers.
As a frequent customer of Sweetwater,
thank you, appreciate that.
Myself, and in fact,
He's recorded his own songs that I've heard, by the way, and they're very good.
All and 100% of that equipment outside of the distortion pedal that I stole from you.
You could
was
slice one
purchased
of those
at
into the end of
Sweetwater.
this podcast, maybe?
Ooh,
We could
I
find
don't
something
know.
like that?
Well, Jeff, if you can give out discounts, he did steal my distortion pedal.
Oh,
That's
okay.
true.
All
He
right.
will not give it back.
We'll
and
talk
I'm not
about
even-
that after
All
the
right,
show.
we'll
Very
talk
nice.
about that.
But
Discount from Jeff.
There you go.
as a customer, I'm very familiar with the incredible customer service, and that is clearly the bread and butter. That is where Sweetwater is rooted. Which came, I mean, this is a sort of chicken egg, I'm sure, but the focus on such great customer service, but then bringing that back into how you work, how you treat your coworkers.
Yes.
Just kind of, can you walk through how either one permeates the other? The first came, just talk a little bit about how that all.
Well, you kind of say it right. It's really a virtuous cycle, right? Like one feeds the other and vice versa. One of the things I go back to all the time is if you go back to Chuck, our founder, he has said, continues to say that at the end of the day, he started the business to help his friends make music. And I'll tell our folks, there's two key words in that phrasing, friends and music, right? And there's lots of companies out there that make music.
Yeah.
Oh,
There
yeah.
are- Not all of them necessarily consider people to truly be their friends. And I actually think that's the most essential part of what we do is treating people like a friend, whether that's a colleague, whether that's an employee, whether it's somebody that's on your team, whether it's a customer, whether it's a vendor we work with, like treating people as human beings and caring for them well. If you put on that mindset and bend over backwards, right? Like you'd go above and beyond for a really good friend,
Sure.
right? But sometimes when you get into business, you kind of dumb that down a little bit. Like the friend becomes a transaction, it becomes a revenue
Yeah.
number. Well, that's not our view. Our view is they're all friends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that really strikes me about it, I would venture to guess the average employee at Sweetwater is 10 times the guitar player that I am.
Oh, 100%.
And,
Well, that's not saying much.
but
though,
what's
is it?
what's amazing is you go in the old in even the new expanded retail store, and everyone just wants to help, and it never feels intimidating, and I'm there just fumbling around, and
It never feels commission based.
Yeah, it really doesn't.
It feels authentic.
Yeah. Well, and it's the quality of people that we have, like tons of passion, because you're right. Vast majority of folks out there are musicians, come to it because this isn't just a paycheck. Like it's
Right.
really a heart
Yeah.
thing for
Passion.
them is they love it. And we're not making widgets. Like we're doing beautiful things in a beautiful industry and really caring for people well every step along the way. So yeah, when you come into the music store, they're not there just to sell you a guitar. It's
Right.
like they want to get to know you as a human being, like what really drives and motivates you and what are you trying to accomplish with your music, and then let the relationship form around that.
Well, which reminds me, you guys are responsible, one of the entities responsible for this show. So you're on our logo. Did you know that?
I think I did know that.
Yeah, okay.
I think I did.
Because we were pestering you through Nick. Hey, can you help us out launch the show? And it worked.
Yes.
So thank you for
You got to
that.
get these microphones from somewhere.
We,
right?
we had to get them from somewhere, so we went to your house. Anyway, you no
Appreciate
longer have
that.
a studio in the basement. So, okay, you were a guest, or I think it was on First Fridays Fort Wayne.
I was a couple of years back.
Yep.
Mhm.
And thanks to Callie and her vicious notes here, you talked about that typically there's a disconnect between what people do every day and if they're making an impact. Do you remember saying that?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. So, I think it's easy for corporations to say, it's about the people. It's about the things, blah, blah, blah. I come from big ad agencies in New York and Chicago and blah, blah, blah. That's not that they might say that, but it's not in the DNA. It's not in the soul of the entity. You're in advertising to make an impact, to make another commercial, to blah, blah, blah. And I think it's hard to really reach the soul of people. So you're talking about roles that people have and the impact that they have because of their roles. Can you talk to that a little bit? Because how can you ensure or even get a bird's eye view that, yes, this is working?
You have to help connect the dots, I believe, is a huge part of it. And if you drill down into where most of us work in our day-to-days, some of us have the opportunity to just be like really closely in touch with what our passion is, right? And maybe that's true for you guys. Like, man, this is the thing that I dreamed of doing since I was a little kid, and here I am. And every day I walk in energized and enthused.
I was born to be an economic developer.
I mean, that's what most people say when they're 8 years old, right? Like that's what you want to get
Well,
into.
not that per se, but I do advertising.
Yeah.
So doing this is where my passion
His passion is.
Yeah.
Yeah. But at the same time, you've got folks that are walking into places of their work, right? And maybe I'm sweeping the floors. Maybe I'm an accountant. Maybe I'm a lawyer. And they may be really in touch with that's the passion, right? But sometimes like work is just hard at times, right? It's not always easy. It's not always fun. If you're doing good, powerful, impactful things or are connected to it in any way, like it takes effort, and,
Yeah.
and sometimes it doesn't go smooth. Like human beings can be messy sometimes, and
Well,
so
we have a life outside of work. That's
Yeah.
and sometimes you bring that with you.
you bring that with you, and vice versa. Then
Right.
you take work back home with you, right? And those things impact each other. So we talk all the time. I mean, you guys are, I'm sure, familiar with this guy Simon Sinek, the power of why, right? Connecting back to what's your personal why. But I think oftentimes organizations miss the opportunity to connect people back to the why of what they're doing. Like, what does the organization exist for? And sometimes, like for us, maybe it's a little bit easier because it's music, it's cool, that's vibey. But any organization that started at any point in time really started it because like they thought they could make a positive impact in the world. Like whether I thought I could sell insurance better, or I thought I could make auto parts better, or I could do whatever, right? Like I had a service and a need for somebody that I wanted to meet. And like if you're doing it well, unless it's immoral or unethical, like you're making a positive difference in the world. And I think a lot of times leaders and managers miss the opportunities to connect their employees back to that and say, hey, you may just be making accounting entries today, but it's not just about that. Like understand that if you're not doing that well, this whole business falls apart.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the good that we're doing out in the world isn't possible unless you're a part of it. And that may sound a little bit like a line, but it's actually true. Like it actually is truth. And so I believe sometimes as leaders, we've got to drill back into that and help people understand that connection, because you need a little bit of that inspiration sometimes to get you through the hard days.
Well, I'm glad you said that. So, who inspired you? I mean, and it's a two-part question because did you do sports growing up?
I did go do sports growing up. Yeah, swimming was my
Okay.
thing. Still is my thing, but yes. Was my
Okay,
thing, yeah.
it shows.
Yeah.
I think that people that come out of athletics have a certain sense of teamwork, whatever. But was there somebody in particular on your career path that inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a few. Be too many to name. I think of one guy back when I was college. There was one summer where I was swimming with a club program, not with my college team at the time, and went to go swim for this guy in North Carolina. That was a really hard driving, hard charging, put a lot of expectation on you type of coach. Was not warm and fuzzy all the
So,
time.
did you not like that at the time?
Well, at first I wasn't sure what to think.
'Cause I was the uncoachable athlete.
Yeah,
I will tell you.
I mean, I like to put my head down and do the work, so I wasn't afraid of doing
Yeah.
the work. But the style was a little bit unnerving at first, and sometimes frustrating
Yeah.
because you just keep pushing. But what I began to realize over a course of a couple months was this guy believed I was capable of doing more than what I even believed I was. And like the pushing was because he wasn't satisfied with a lower standard, and was challenging me to a higher level, and actually really did fundamentally believe it. And if there were ever moments of frustration that appeared to come out from him, it was because he actually knew there was something more that was possible than what I had achieved to that point.
Something untapped.
And so by the
Yeah,
time I got to
right.
the end of the season, like I remember standing up on the championship competition at the end of the summer and standing up at the blocks and just feeling like bulletproof, because it's like I knew at that point in time there is nobody up there that had been pushed harder, that had put in more work, that was more prepared, and the confidence level was outstanding. But it was because this guy held the bar so high and pushed us all, myself included, to do things more than what we even thought we could do. And so you just felt invincible going up there, which is a pretty wonderful feeling to have.
That's amazing. I just got to chill.
Yeah,
I know
love
you say that, but
I did collegiate sports all the way
Yeah.
through. I was a sprinter.
Okay.
So that stuff always, it means a lot to me. But I'll tell you, to me, it's always been kind of twofold, because there's the people like that coach in particular that inspire you or shows you that there's something out front of you and you have to catch up to it. There's also those people that uninspire you, and you either react to it, or, well, you react to it either way, but you either react in a positive way to get yourself better or a negative way. And I think, I guess I'm curious as to, was there anybody that, or whether it's self-imposed, whether it's imposed from somebody else, or something elusive that stood in your way? Did you ever have to overcome something like that, whether it's self-doubt or...
Yeah, I would say a big one for me is just self-criticism, right? So maybe a little bit different than self-doubt, although that probably kind of close siblings there. But I can be highly internally critical, like there's nothing that anybody could say to me right? That like I haven't already thought in terms of this is what I should be doing better. And so sometimes the challenge for me personally can be if somebody comes in and layers of criticism on top of my internal criticism, it's like, oh man, I'm getting piled on.
Yeah.
And it's actually not their doing. And they don't even realize it sometimes. Is it's like I'm coming on top of my own thing.
That's fascinating.
And so a lot of times I got to coach myself through those places to get to a better place.
Well, that's what a pioneer does. But I think what happens is you either there's self-criticism is okay. If it starts creeping into self-doubt, then you've got a bigger problem.
Yeah, that's well said.
Somebody who's been successful like you for one of the world's greatest brands, in my opinion, I think if you must still get that self-doubt. There's been a lot of change going over at Sweetwater for the past 3 years. You guys were bought out 3 years ago.
Yes.
And can we talk a little bit about the changes that you've had to pivot or go through? Because what did it do to the culture? I mean, I'm sure there were some obstacles.
I was going to ask a similar question, but I mean, when you talk about being the chief people and culture officer, an acquisition of a company of that size,
that's on you.
There's no greater seismic shift to a culture than an acquisition.
Something like that.
In
Absolutely.
some ways.
So it's your fault.
How did you navigate that?
Yeah, well, a great team, number one. So yes, I do have the title and feel the responsibility of that. At the same time, we've got a wonderful group of people that are leading that organization, and Chuck, our founder.
So you didn't feel the heat?
Felt the heat, yes, but also didn't feel it alone. Right.
Okay.
I mean, one of the great parts of Sweetwater is they're really at every level in the organization, but including the leadership level, there's a wonderful group of people that are very like-minded. Right. So it's not like you've got one guy out here being the champion of the culture and everybody else is just kind of doing their day job. Right. Like, no, we're actually all very linked and aligned in what needs to be done. And a lot of that came about of so many of us have spent long careers within Sweetwater. I mean, I've been there for 12 years. We've got people on the leadership team that have been there for 15, 20 years that came to the business and grew up in the business, not just as a job, like as a passion and a belief for what this company is and what it represents. Music, yes, of course, but also the way we take care of people and want to take care of people. So when we came to the private equity transaction, one of the biggest things we went into it was, look, we don't want this culture to change. Like, this is what has made us successful. Chuck, all the way down to everybody in the leadership team, says, look, this isn't broken. It's actually incredibly healthy and wonderful. Not perfect. Everybody's got opportunities, right? But there's a lot of good things here. And so when we went through the process of looking for a partner on the PE side, we said job number one has to be find somebody that will honor that and respect that they don't come in as a partner.
So you come in with that as a non-negotiable then.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And so we met with folks out there in the industry, and for those who know PE know that sometimes that's not what you get with a PE partner.
You might during the negotiation.
Yeah, and everybody's going to say, tell a good story. And so there was a very thorough vetting, from Chuck, and our leadership team was invited into that process to have input and feedback on partners that we were meeting with, and to ultimately land on a partner that we said, we believe, and these folks have a track record of respecting and honoring the cultures that they've been invited into. So that gave us a lot of confidence going into where we're at now, and it really has been a great partnership. We've got resources and capabilities even beyond what we had 3+ years ago to invest in the business and grow the business and go out and serve music makers in better ways. And we've had all the ability that we had 3+ years ago to continue to steward and shape the culture in the way we want.
Excellent.
That's amazing.
It's funny too, because I had never, before I took the gig here, I had never been to Fort Wayne. And yet I'm supposed to market the 11 counties, and so I had to, get up to speed quick. And it always makes my day when friends come and I see them posting online pictures of themselves at Sweetwater. Now I still haven't tried the slide, but
we got to make that happen.
We got to make that happen. We might do that today.
A guy that works with us on PR says he doesn't want to come visit us here. He's from out of market. Doesn't want to come visit us here because he's afraid it'll impact his marriage if he goes to Sweetwater in person.
Yeah. Well, when you walk out with 6 guitars at a time, that can be a
he's got 5.
Thing. Okay.
So I think
that's manageable.
We'll tell Peter's wife you said that. Interesting. You talk a lot about team and about people, and I just have to read this. on campus, you guys have a salon and a spa, a fitness center, restaurant and coffee shop, a medical clinic, and an arcade.
Yes. And more. Put and more.
There's a music store there too.
I heard you guys sell guitars or something, and I heard pedals.
You don't have to buy those; just steal them from.
You just steal them from coworkers. But do you guys? So I know you guys take requests from your from everybody within your partners.
Yeah.
Have you gotten any crazy requests to add on to that?
Like different kinds of stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's
amenities that they would.
Yeah, there's all kinds of things. I mean, one I'll share that we actually are doing for our employees, so I have to preface it as that. We're adding on a disc golf course outside here shortly.
Get out of here.
Yeah, so we've got some extra land out back behind some of our
We'll have to
buildings.
tell Chase.
So
our coworker is in a league here. So.
Yeah, well, don't tell him because we don't want everybody. We're going to crowd our employees out. But
he's been applying for jobs.
Yeah,
anyway,
okay.
So
well, if we hire him, then it's okay.
Okay. But how many requests do you guys get like a month?
It would be hard to quantify that, but yeah, we get all kinds of ideas that come in about, could you do more? I mean, we actually into the salon that we do have a masseuse that comes in as part of that. We've had a request for chiropractors, right? Like any kind of class-based thing, any program or service you can imagine, right? At some point or another, either it comes up from an employee or an outside vendor says, hey, we could come do this for you too. And we've always just got to evaluate like, hey, it's all cool stuff, but like what's actually feasible within the space.
Is it hard to sell that into the organization? Like
in what way?
Well, hey, we want this and you got to spend money on us because we're requesting it.
Yeah. It depends. I mean, most of our folks are very reasonable and understanding, but like
every employee gets a car.
Yeah, right.
Okay,
right. Like
you
can throw an idea out there, and of course it's got to match up with like what the business is capable of doing and how we can prioritize things. But then you do stuff like the disc golf course came from one of our salespeople. And he says, hey, I don't know, this might be crazy. Like, I can't think you guys would ever do this, but a bunch of us are players. And I saw this property out back that's, just kind of grassland. Like, maybe we could put a few baskets in there. And we're like, well, let's run a lap on it. And we dig into it. We're like, yeah, that's not a crazy lift. It's not hugely expensive. Like, that just makes sense. Let's go do that. So we're knocking it out.
Yeah, it's just, in my experience, the bigger the company gets, the harder it is to push things through.
Yeah.
But it seems like you guys aren't having that trouble.
No, I think we try and facilitate those ideas. Again, you can't do everything that somebody would want, but oftentimes I think a lot of the things that companies can do, because sometimes we'll also get the feedback from smaller organizations like, well, yeah, but you guys are huge. Like,
of course you can do
all that stuff. But I'm like,
yeah.
I mean, like actually this disc golf thing, like if I told you what we spent on it, it's like this. Like any small organization could go like, let's just put 3 disc golf baskets out back. Like, and so people can go mess around and have a good time.
They'd be mad about it in the alley here.
Yeah, like you guys could totally fit this out, down outside the building, right? So a lot of it ends up being like more about the thoughtfulness.
Yeah.
And like, are you carving out mind space to actually think about these things and do these things that may not dramatically change people's lives? Like at the end of the day, a disc golf course isn't going to put food on the table, and it's not going to take care of your medical bills for you.
No.
So like you got to think about those things too in terms of the employee experience. But a lot of that stuff is like table stakes, right? Like everybody needs to get paid and have benefits. And then sometimes I think the difference is like, yeah, but are you willing to do a little bit extra? We talk about that all the time with our customers.
Yeah.
Are you willing to do a little bit extra, go above and beyond what the normal day in, day out experience will be that a customer gets everywhere they go? Like that's the stuff that makes things memorable, but you can apply that same thinking to employees.
Yeah. That kind of goes back to my earlier question. I think it's amazing how that has permeated both sides of it. I also think there's just a tremendous intangible benefit to that sales engineer knowing that he or she was heard,
Yes.
was listened to, and then will, I'm sure, talk to his or her coworkers, and they'll think, oh gosh, they'll listen to
You
me.
actually can get ideas.
Yeah, and you know what
That's got to be so powerful.
Well, exactly, and you know what I found though. I remember this. This always comes to mind. We were agency of record for Global McDonald's in one of my gigs, and the bigger the company, the more those budgets are sealed up. So we couldn't get. We asked for $26,000 from McDonald's, and I don't quote me on this, but I think they can afford it. And it was
sell a couple more burgers.
It sell a couple of Big Macs nowadays. That's probably 5 Big Macs at this. But it was hard to push things through the bigger and more global McDonald's got. And I don't know if that's just victim of circumstance or what the challenge is, but we would have to take on some of those initiatives by getting funding, co-funding and things like that. I mean, back when I was working with them, the number one giver to the Ronald McDonald House was Southwest Airlines. It wasn't McDonald's, which a lot of
interesting,
yeah, a lot of people don't know that. But I think what happens is the bigger you get, the more difficult it is to push things through because there's more tape.
Yes, absolutely. Well, and you get layers in an organization which you can't avoid, and we haven't been immune to that. I mean, we would still have employees now that would say, "Hey, I've been here 2 decades." And it feels different than what it did 2 decades ago. And the answer is...
It should,
probably. Yes, it will. Some of it's unavoidable because it's going to feel different than when you were working in Chuck's garage, right? And you can look back at that nostalgically, and in many ways you should, right? Like, man, there was a cool intimacy, and we were all in it together, us against the world, 40 employees. But there are also a lot of things you couldn't do at that point in time, right? Like we didn't have the salon and we didn't have all these other benefits and perks. So it's like with the growth, some things become more accessible and then it does become a challenge to do the other things. And so people would say now, well, I used to be able to just email our one IT guy to get something taken care of, right? Like,
well, call Mike, he'll be here.
Yeah, and they'll take care of it. Now it's like I got to submit a ticket into a system and wait for a team to get back to me. It's like, yeah, you do, because the one IT guy can't service the IT needs of 2,500 people anymore. Like that's a reality. So then it just becomes, what kind of effort are you as an organization willing to put into breaking through those barriers, right? Are you doing intentional things to listen? Are you doing things to try and let ideas flow to the surface? No perfect solution to it, but I think it's the effort and the heart of care that makes the difference. Bigger organization gets, some things are going to be harder to manage, but there's got to be the intentionality about going after it.
Hi, everyone. We want to take a quick moment to shout out our podcast sponsors. Now, first, you might be wondering who I am, so let me introduce myself. I am Hannah Hannigan, and normally I'm behind the camera as the videographer, but today I wanted to be in front of the camera to shout out the people who made this podcast possible. Barrett McNagny and Sweetwater Sound are the 2 sponsors of our podcast, and they're both located in Northeast Indiana. If you don't already know who they are, let me introduce them to you. We're going to start with Barrett McNagny. As Fort Wayne has grown, the Barrett Law Firm has grown with it. Founded in 1876, Barrett McNagny is one of the oldest law partnerships in Indiana, and it's among one of the largest just in Northeast Indiana. They have the breadth of experience across a wide range of practice areas to provide you trusted legal counsel where and when you need it. And Sweetwater is actually the one we were able to purchase most of our audio and video gear from to make this podcast. So if you like how this podcast sounds or how it looks, be sure to check them out. Sweetwater, the nation's largest, and I would also add friendliest destination for music gear, is also your one-stop shop for all things podcasting. From audio interfaces, recording software, mixers, microphones, cameras, and lighting, Sweetwater has everything to get your podcast up and running. Enjoy personalized gear advice from their dedicated team of sales engineers, as well as free technical support to get your podcast connected and up and running. Really, what's not to love about that? So whether you already have a following or you're still chasing the next big thing, Sweetwater is going to be the ones to help you create a podcast that everyone will be talking about. So if you're interested in either of these companies, be sure to check out the links in our description. Now, let's get back to the podcast.
You mentioned, Jeff, earlier the strategy, and you just said the intentionality of investing in your coworkers and creating that culture. But also within your realm is human resources, which tends to be a very reactive sort of industry within the company. How do you balance those two sides to be really strategic and proactive, but also knowing that a lot of your day is just going to be putting out fires with how many employees now?
2,500
employees.
Yes. Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a very real thing, and you identify it well. There's the thoughtfulness that we put into all the things we want to do. But then you could have one employee who's really struggling and having a hard time or having friction with a coworker, that issue hits your desk today. And it's like, okay, I had this planned, but I got to dive in and be there for this human being and really help them navigate this situation. So we talk all the time with our HR team, again, about the core of it is like, what's the heart of it, right? Is do you view that person as a distraction to your day of the thing that you'd want to do? Or that's actually what I'm here for, right? When they steal your pedals, it's a little bit harder.
Thank you.
Yeah, that one, we'll have to do some counseling on that one a little bit later on.
I thought it was a gift, Jonathan.
Ryan.
Where's your HR guy right now?
Sackett and Ryan need interventions on an ongoing basis. If you don't mind, I want to talk a little bit more about the acquisition.
Sure.
Because, having been a part of mergers and acquisitions from the agency side of things, it never goes well. And I could tell you all the horror stories. We were actually on the cover of the New York Times for one of the bad things. So
I'm sorry.
It's you know what you live through makes you stronger. But with the acquisition, as you think back to that transitional time, you knew it was coming, it came, and then you went on from there. But the question is there anything now in retrospect, when you think back to that you wish you would have known beforehand or you wish you would have done differently? Is there any, I'm not talking about regret necessarily, but obviously change was inflicted upon you.
Yes. Yeah, and you're right, because so many of us were involved at the leadership level, the senior-most leadership level, in working through the decision with Chuck as the founder and owner. We had a little bit more preparation internally for what was coming, right? It's a sensitive thing, right? And so even when we gave the news to the rest of the team, we had a lot of feedback, as you would expect, of like, wait a minute, where did this come from? This came out of left field. Well, that's a challenging thing, right? Because like we didn't know if it was going to happen until it happened. So we could have told everybody 6 months ahead of time, but then you create a bunch of anxiety about something that wasn't necessarily all the way to fruition. I do think that, with the benefit of hindsight, probably all of us would say, in that moment, in that season, we made a lot of effort to make the rounds and go talk to people and give them assurance that it was all going to be all right. We could have doubled down on that. We could have doubled, tripled, like had more one-to-one conversations, had more human conversations. We recognized that was a seismic shift that the organization was going to go through, having been owned by one person since the beginning in 1979.
From the VW.
From the VW bus. And necessarily because people have heard stories of private equity horror stories.
Oh, yeah.
They go, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my job?
It's usually not interesting unless there's some drama.
Yeah.
So people will magnify
That's a
that.
good point. No one really tells the good stories.
Everything's great. Okay, well, show's over.
Yeah. And so there were a lot of those conversations that were happening, trying to assure people that, hey, it really is going to be good. And does it mean everything's going to be exactly the same? No. Doesn't mean it's going to be bad, though. And we just could have done even more of it, right? There could have been more dialogue, more lunch table conversations, like more let's get people together and talk this through at a smaller level.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of it's really change management, right? Like that's what it was. If you put a kind of a big strategic word around it, but just dialing into that in an even more intense way would have been good.
It's interesting that you say that, because I think, it's hard to sell people on a willing suspension of disbelief. Hey, everything will be. Sometimes I think you find that the more that you tell people it's going to be okay, the more skeptical they become.
Yes.
So you're kind of riding that line. I mean, just from an outside observer, it didn't seem like you guys were culture shocked, dinged. It seemed like everything rolled fairly smoothly. And I say that because of our online scours and things like that. We're always looking for tonality of verbiage, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But it sounded like there wasn't a heck of a lot.
No, I mean there was and there wasn't. Is I think for many people there was a shock. Like, wait a minute, I thought Chuck was going to be here forever. Well, Chuck at some point in time, Chuck wasn't going to live forever, and there would be transition. I'm just not sure that many people thought it would be in that season.
The two are just so synonymous
for
so long.
It still kind of is. I mean, it's just how are you going to escape that?
Right.
When people throw Chuck's name out there, no one goes, Chuck who?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and his imprint still flows through every aspect of what we do as an organization in a wonderful way. And so, like it was a shock, and there was angst and emotions around all that. And some of it, you're right, you can say it's all going to be okay 100 times. Some of it, you're just not going to fully believe it until time passes. Like, I need to fast forward 3 years and feel that it hasn't degraded to actually believe. Like, there's nothing I could do to assure you about the future right now. other than hopefully build as much trust as I can, or have built enough trust to where you would take my word for it. But a lot of it is just kind of wait and see how it goes. And the other challenge I think we've had along the way, candidly, is some things that we would have experienced anyway, just as a function of growth. People go, oh, well, that's because you had a change in ownership. I remember I had an interaction.
Everything goes back to that, right?
I had a true story. I had an interaction with one guy out in the community that sent me a note on LinkedIn, and he's like, man, I just got to give you feedback that it feels like Sweetwater's completely changed since this whole private equity thing. Like, you're not the same company you used to be. And went on and on and on. And I'm like, hey, and so I wrote him back. I'm
so
like,
you
hey,
got
man.
my email.
Yeah. I wasn't gonna name names, but I wrote him back. I'm like, hey, thanks for the feedback. I appreciate it. Can you unpack that for me a little bit? Like, what are you indexing on? Like, and he's like, well, I was in there a few weeks ago and you guys raised prices in the diner, and like Chuck would have never raised prices in the diner. And so I just went back to him and I'm like, well, actually, I've been here 12 years and Chuck did raise prices in the diner at one point. And like, have you seen the food inflation? And have you seen like what McDonald's has done to you lately? And like, we'd like to be able to just like subsidize free food for the world, but like, we are running a business, so we had to change prices, and that's actually got nothing to do with the ownership. The guy wrote back and he's like, okay, thank you. That helps me understand better. And it's like, okay, so you see a change or something you don't like, and you kind of attribute causality to it, like, oh, it's because of this, and it's like,
I remember,
no, like, things change anyway.
I was in a conversation once. I was in a meeting once, and Chuck Surack was there, and he was lamenting the increased cost of beef. And it was just it was a funny thing to think of this, music distribution magnate who is
like, our costs
sweating
are going,
the cost
company's
of beef.
costs are going up just like it is for everybody else, and then you got to figure out how do you manage that as best you can.
It's hard to get people to focus on the right things, the right momentum. And let's face it, the 80-20 rule is for online behavior is always the negative. People lead with the negative because the positive isn't interesting, and they're looking for more likes or whatever. So that stuff will happen. But about Sweetwater, what is one surprising fact that most people may not know about Sweetwater?
I don't know. I feel like we've put ourselves out there to the world so much and are pretty transparent that I'm not sure that there's that much in there that's surprising.
Being newer here, I will tell you, I didn't even know that you guys had the stage set up and everything.
The pavilion.
I didn't even know that you had that.
Yeah, I mean, so I could go through all kinds of lists of things that we do, right? So we've got the outdoor concert pavilion. We hosted 17 outdoor concerts this year. We do music workshops, so we'll invite in artists where you can come, pay a few bucks and sit and learn about how somebody recorded their album, learn best practices on music, bass, drumming.
You guys have a podcast educational thing there, too.
We do a lot of content, so our video channels, I mean, there's all kinds of content that we're churning out. We've got people on staff that are, pro drummers, guitarists, right, that are talking about, and for us, so much of it comes back to the product and the gear, right? Like, we're a retailer. We put music gear and audio equipment out into the world. And so a lot of it for us is like the care and the passion for the human being and the customer, and this amazing level of technical expertise, right? Like, we really do know this stuff better,
no doubt about
better
it.
than anybody.
Well, we were just down at the Pearl, and the sound, the acoustics in that main room. We're talking about having our next event there, and literally one of the guys on our team stood at the back of the room, and I stood at the front, and I spoke at this volume, and he could hear me.
Oh yeah. That's all done with intentionality, right? Like,
it's insane. I mean, you guys have the floating floor.
Oh yes, yeah. Yeah, so we could go into our so we've got a recording studio on campus. Not everybody may know that. So we're doing album projects, we're doing singles, we're doing mixing. I mean, like, anything that you could need to do that requires a studio environment, we're doing it. And so when that studio was constructed on our campus, a few interesting things about that. We brought in this guy, Russ Berger, world-renowned individual who designs studios and spaces all around the globe. And so we actually had to build, one of the things that's interesting is the floor is built on shock absorbers because right outside...
Industrial slinkies.
Yes, that's exactly right. And the reason for that is not that far away from that room inside our building is Highway 30 that has semis that are rumbling down. There's actually vibration that travels through the ground into that space that could throw off the acoustics of the room.
Unbelievable.
So to absorb that rumbling, and not to allow that to transfer into the room. It's built on shock absorbers. When we built the room, it's also like a room within the building, right? So the room itself is kind of a box. It doesn't go up to the deck of the building, again, to insulate it from the sound protection. Chuck, our founder, is a helicopter pilot. So when we first opened the room up, at one point, he flew the helicopter over the building while we were recording to see if you could hear the noise coming into the room. And thankfully, it didn't, right? So like we tested it. We shock tested it about as well as you possibly can. Yeah.
So we're getting towards the end, so we're going to get into the rapid wrap up in a second. But one of the things that we found with people that tune in or watch the show, they're usually looking for career advice, somebody who's out front of them, obviously, such as yourself. But I'm just wondering, is there a difference between what you, prior to working at Sweetwater, how you viewed success versus now? And that's kind of a twofold question, because you've been there 12 years. You're probably a different guy or an enhanced man, we can say it that way. Was there a difference in the way you've measured success now that you're matured, now that you've gone through all these hurdles? Is there a way that you look at that differently?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd call it a difference, but it is certainly a greater level of appreciation, a growing understanding. Oftentimes we talk about moving from like a sense of success, like I'm going to achieve a certain title or a paycheck, to impact, like what's the positive contribution I make into the world. I would say probably part of the evolution for me, and I don't know if it would be purely attributed to Sweetwater, or it's just like, hey, growing in years and failing through things and seeing your flaws in different sorts of ways. I think I've probably actually gone a little bit from like success to impact to like actually just like, I don't know, maybe sound like so philosophical, but like just viewing like contentment and the work itself as the contribution, right? Because I think you can get really caught up, like you can get obsessively caught up in, am I making enough money? Have I got the title? Am I at the top of my field? Am I getting industry like that can consume you in a way that's not always healthy. Yeah. But you can also be equally as consumed by like, yeah, but I want to like make Fort Wayne the best city, which is not a bad thing, or our region the best region, which is not a bad thing, like can drive people to accomplish really wonderful things. But like inner personally and like in yourself, like you can also get really wrecked if it's not going the way that you want. And so I think there's some evolution, at least for me, that's been like, you just got to take pleasure and joy in the work itself and let the outcome be what the outcome's going to be. Like give it your all, press into it with everything you've got. And that's not like a new thing. Like I actually learned that in some ways back when I was swimming and doing athletics, like enjoy the process and then let the outcomes take care of them themselves. And don't define yourself by like whether you hit the top of the podium or not. Like if you gave it everything you could. I think sometimes in the professional world, we lose sight of that. Like now it becomes about how am I measuring myself against my peers, or, you know, am I sending the most music out into the world compared to my competitors, things like that. And it's like, man, just find joy in the work, find joy in the relationships and the work that you get to do. And whether your measurement is the money or it's the impact, in both cases, let that take care of itself. And I think that actually goes all the way back to the way Chuck started Sweetwater. I mean, he started it with, I'm going to help my friends make music. Like, this is just the work I'm going to do. And it was never about building a $1.6 billion company. Like, that wasn't the vision and the goal. It was just do the work, care for people well, and maybe that will aggregate over time to have a big business. But even if it didn't, and I'm confident in saying it, is even if it had never become that, like Chuck still would have found joy and purpose in a smaller version of that same work.
Helping his friends make
because
music.
That's what it was always about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, can I make an observation that I think I coming into this, I wouldn't have put these words together, but what I find really fascinating about Sweetwater in general is at its core, it's almost a logistics company. I mean, really, that when it comes down to it, it's a logistics company.
To maintain profitability, it would almost have to be.
But you have not everything you've said and everything I've observed from being physically there and even on the website is you've not lost sight of that it's about helping friends make music at its core. You could get so hung up on the logistics side of it that you'd lose sight of that. I think similarly, the way you talk about your coworkers, you have 2,500 employees. You've never once said the employees there. People are not individual units of talent. They are it's the human and human resources. And I just think that's a really powerful at least observation that I've just made is you could have easily become a HR professional as opposed to a someone who invests in people.
Yes.
You could have easily become a logistics company and lost the soul of the organization, which is helping friends make music. And it's just a tremendous testament to you, to the senior leadership team, to Chuck, and even your private equity partners that came in to allow that to stay is really awesome.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's well said. And we could do a whole nother session on the logistics side of it and the technical side of, what goes into our e-commerce work and the quality. I mean, really best in class.
Well, let Stefan host that one.
Yeah, come back next week.
Do that one because it is true. Like there is that side of the operation, but we're doing our best work and putting in our best effort every day to try and blend those two things together. Like how is it technically the best organization it can be while still caring for people well?
You never mentioned shipping nodes or anything like that in this whole conversation.
Well, and I'm not
and
the
we
guy.
were really waiting for it too, which is weird.
And I'm not the guy probably that's going to geek out as well but I could bring some other people in on our team that would like blow your mind when it comes to those worlds. And that is one of the things that makes what we do so great is it's the heart and care for human beings, but it really is functionally and technically. We've just got people throughout every area of the organization that are the best at what they do in any industry, really, which allows us to do what we do so well.
And they're devoting that to helping friends make music.
That's right.
Yeah, we had to divide the Tin Caps show into 2 shows. So if we get to do that with Sweetwater,
might be a part 2 here.
So we're getting into rapid wrap-up now. So the first question is, and Ryan and I will share these, but if you had a friend visiting from out of town, where would you take them to dinner?
So obviously I'm a little bit biased. I would go to Clyde Theater Club Room. Good food, good entertainment. It's music. It got to earlier in my time with Chuck, got to play a role in putting some of that together, and it's still an amazing operation. So yeah, that'd be my go-to.
Okay.
All right.
You want to take that?
Toughest body of water you've ever tried to swim?
Oh my goodness. Toughest body of water. There's some out there that I haven't swum that'll be interesting to tackle someday. But I've had some interesting experiences in Lake Michigan.
Okay.
When the waves really
There's just a little bit of fear behind your eyes when you said that.
Yeah, I moved you from Chicago, man. Trust me.
I won't say too much, but there was one year a few years ago where the race that I was scheduled to do, they canceled it. A few of us jumped into the water anyway, just for fun, and then we later found out there were water spouts in Lake Michigan at the same time. And then we came back and thought maybe we won't do that again the same way.
Where was that coach when you needed him to push?
Yeah,
you
that's
a little
right.
bit
That's
harder?
right.
That's the problem. Okay, so best live music event you've ever been to?
Oh man, how do you pick that? So many. Best live music event. Look, I would probably go back to, this is a little bit nostalgic, but early days of music going in concerts. I is a Parrot Head, Jimmy Buffett, something about like the
that's a whole atmosphere.
That's a whole it's an experience, right?
Yeah.
It's the music, but it's the experience and it's the community. And I think any live music event that I've been a part of, like when you have that sense of community, like we're together in this, we're not, that's the stuff that always.
There's a consistent theme throughout everything that you've spoken.
There
of
you
today.
go. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite genre or favorite artist?
Oh no, yeah. I mean, I'm all over the place. Like I do listen to a lot of Christian gospel worship stuff. Listen to. Hip hop. I mean, like I'm grew up in the 90s, right?
Yeah.
So like classic 90s hip hop and stuff. I mean, all over the place. Yeah.
And then the last one that I had was, do you have a favorite interview that was ever done by Sweetwater?
A favorite interview that was ever done? Again, it'd be so hard to pick. I mean, we've had.
I mean, thousands.
Yeah,
obviously.
Thousands of interviews. And again, this will sound like maybe I'm being a little bit biased. I really do like the Chuck interviews that we've done.
I was watching a couple of them last night. Just wonderful.
Because you get to any size organization, and if you're not close to the human beings that sit in the leadership, you can easily just like paint this picture of like, this is a successful CEO. This is, you know, these are executives that are corporate and they almost get viewed as robots. And I think one of the things that becomes really visible when you listen to a Chuck interview, but this would be true of any of our executives if you sat them down, is like they all have this heart, right? And Chuck has this heart, and he's a real human being. And like, it seems funny to even have to say that, but we all of us tend to view leaders that are far off from us as like they're somehow other than a normal human being that has a heart and emotions and like actually cares for people well. But I love it when I've seen his interviews in any number of settings, whether we've done it or other communities partners have done it. Like, you see that heart come through loud and clear, and I just think it's just a great representation of who he is and what Sweetwater is.
Genuine authenticity.
That's what I was going to say. Absolutely. It shines through. I mean, you feel like you're just talking to your neighbor when you watch the guy in interviews. Absolutely outstanding, as are you.
No, thank you. I appreciate that.
So, Jeff Ostermann from Sweetwater, I can't thank you enough for being here, and I would hope and invite you to join us for a round 2, because I feel like we could talk to you forever.
I'm game. We'll come back and I'll bring a logistics person with me. We'll
talk. We'll
geek out on details.
Who knows? Bring a couple of pedals. Maybe we can find a home. Maybe we can find a home for them. Insert dirty look.
I love it. We'll fill up the table with pedals next time. Let you guys have your pick.
If only we knew somebody who had that many pedals. Jeff, I can't thank you enough. You're awesome, great guy. Congratulations on all of your personal success and the success of Sweetwater. It's so impressive. And like I said, that was one of the big things that really lured me when I was coming here, because coming from a musical background myself, I thought, oh my God, Sweetwater is right there. So I've spent a lot of time up there. And by the way, the cafeteria is not too bad. Not too expensive.
Well, thank you. My pleasure being with you guys, and thank you for doing this. Thank you for amplifying the voices of everybody in our region.
Thanks for contributing.
This is great. Glad to be a part of it.
Thanks again for joining us. The NEI Pioneer Podcast. Of course, you can find us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, but do not forget to join us on pioneerstartshere.com and to nominate next year's Pioneer of the Year. Thanks again, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Jeff.